Hi, this is Simon from Tokyo Productions and welcome to another tutorial for Motion 5. And today we're going to be looking at creating this rain on glass effect. Now, I make no apologies for the fact that this is a straight rip-off of a new tutorial by the great Andrew Kramer at videocopilot.net. But enough of you have asked to see how it could be done in motion. So let's see how that's going to work. I've brought in my background image here, and let's come to my project properties. And I don't want it to be this full height here. At the moment I've got 1920 1080, I'm just going to reduce the height to 858 to give me this nice scope image like that. And let's just scoot back to the project properties, and we want to set the duration to 10 seconds. So I also want to add some text, so I'm going to select my text tool, I'm going to type Tokyo Productions, why not? Let's increase the size, let's come over to the properties, let's give it a little bit of rotation on Y. Let's increase the Z a little bit, bring it down on Y there. It's all pretty academic really. Maybe bring it back a little bit on Z like that. I'm just going to call this group BG for background, and I'm going to come over to filters, and just for the time being I'm going to use the Gaussian blur like that. I'll be refining this later on, but just to get us started, the reason for using this is it's a lot quicker than the blur that I am going to eventually use. So our next step is to create some raindrops. So I'm going to come over to the library here. I'm going to come down to content. I'm going to click on the search here and type blur. And I want to add the element called blur 01. There you go. I'm going to drag it right up to the top there to create a new group. Then I want to come to filters, color correction, levels, and I just want to crunch this down a bit. So let's bring the blacks into around there and the whites into around there, just to harden it up a little bit. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is use that to create an emitter. So let's come over to make particles here. Click on that. So the first thing I'm going to do is come over to the shape and select rectangle. And we want to set the arrangement to random fill. And then I'm going to come down and select the adjust item tool, zoom out just a little bit, make sure I have my overlays turned on, so show overlays there. And I just want to drag this out so it's larger than my canvas, something like that. So then I want to come to my emission angle and set that to 270, and the emission range I want to set to 45. And this will mean that the particles are heading downwards, that's what the angle gives me, and they're slightly diverging left and right, and that's what the emission range is giving me. So I want to set the birth rate to 0, I want to set the initial number to 350, and the life I want to set to 15. Let's just come over to properties and set the blend mode to screen. Just going to come back to my emitter, and what I want to do is adjust the speed here. Let's set that down to 0 because I want these to be static raindrops. We're going to be building up various layers. My initial layer is going to be static. I'm going to have some dripping drops, and then I'm going to have some long drips. I also want to come down to scale and set that to 50, and the scale randomness also to 50, and that's just giving me a little bit more organic interest there. So let's call this emitter drops static, and then let's right click duplicate, and let's call this drops moving. So for my moving drops I want to set the birth rate to 50, the birth rate randomness to 50, and the initial number to 50. This time we want some speed. So I'm going to set the speed itself to 25 and the speed randomness to 50. So far we've got something that looks a little bit like that. So obviously at the moment our drops are just soft spheres, and we want them to be a little bit more interesting than that. So I'm going to take this group here and let's call that drops, and to that group I'm going to apply filters, stylize, crystallize. Come over to the properties here. We want to set the speed down to 0, and I just want to set the mix value down to 50. You'll notice that in adding that filter, the blend mode has changed. So we just need to come over to the group, properties, change that blend mode back to screen. So already they've got a little bit more sort of wriggling movement, and that's good. So let's close up these groups, close up those two, come to the top here, create a new group, so object, new group. And what we want to do now is to make the drip. So I'm going to come down to the rectangle tool, and I'm just going to draw a sort of long rectangle like that. Come over to the inspector. Actually, first of all, come to properties and let's reset that so it's in the center. Come to shape, come to geometry, open up the size. I'm going to set the width to 15 and the height to 360. And then I'm going to come over to style, and the fill mode I'm going to select gradient. Open up the gradient editor, and let's remove that right hand color tab, I should say. Let's select this one and make it white. Then let's click on the top here and set an opacity tab and drag that all the way over to the right. Let's click on the left one here and set that location to 35. And we're going to set the opacity for this one down to 0. And what that gives us, if I turn off my original drops there, is a fading rectangle like that. What we also want to do is come back to the geometry and set the roundness to 10. And then what we want to do is we want to come down and select the circle tool, and I'm just going to draw, holding down the option key, a little circle, ellipse rather I should say, at the bottom there. I'm going to come to geometry, open up the radius, and I'm going to set an X value of 20 and a Y value of 30. So I just want it to be sitting on the bottom of the rectangle, so I'm going to come over to properties, let's zero out the X, and let's just adjust the Y so it's somewhere around there, so minus 180 looks about right. So I'm going to call this group drip. And then again, we want to make an emitter out of it. So with this selected, I'm going to come over and make particles. So we need to make quite a few changes to this emitter. First of all is to change the shape to line. And I just want to adjust these start and end points. So I'm going to have minus 2500 for X start, 640 for Y start, 2500 for X end, and 640 for the Y end. And what that does, if I turn on the adjust item tool, you can see I've got the emitter lined up there along the top, above the top of the screen. So again, we want to adjust the emission range. Let's adjust that down to 10. And let's think about birth rate. Let's have a birth rate of 10. Let's have an initial number of 20 and a life of 15. And let's think about the speed. Let's have a speed of 250 and a speed randomness of 150. And again, let's come down to the scale. And what I want to do is to open up the scale itself there, and I'm going to set the X value to 50 and the Y value to 75. And I'm also going to set the scale randomness to 75. That gives us something a bit like that. These strange tadpole looking things. To keep things tidy, I'm going to move that drip particle source into that group there, and I'm going to call this group drips. And then what I want to do is I want to add a couple of filters to it. So the first is to come over to filters and distortion, and I'm going to select underwater. The size I want to set to 0.4 and the speed to 0.2, and I want to set the refraction down to 35. And you'll see that gives us even more tadpole-like behavior. So there you go, tadpoles on glass. Let's add some other filters. Let's come over to filters and come down to stylize, and let's add crystallize again. and we can just live with the default there. So you can see what that crystallize is doing. It's quite usefully just breaking up the edges of those drips and making it look a little bit more drip-like. So if we turn on our drops group, altogether we've got something that looks a little bit like that. Tadpoles and frog spawn. Let's come to the project here, object new group. I just want to group the drips and drops into one group. So select both of those, add them to this new group, and I'm going to call this refraction source. I just want to add a couple of filters to this as well. So first of all, I'm going to come over to filters, color correction, levels, and I just want to bring down the white like that, give it a little bit more definition. And then I also want to come over to filters, blur, Gaussian blur, and I'm going to increase the amount to 20, but I only want this to be in one direction. So I'm going to reduce the horizontal blur down to 0. So we've only got a sort of vertical version of it like that. So there's just a couple of other things I need to do to this group to make it work for us. The first thing is I need to add a background. So I'm going to come to Object, Generators, Image Generators, Color Solid. And I want to move this to the back of the group. So that's Object, Send to Back. And obviously I want to make this color black like that. And I just want to select these drips here, and I want to set their blend mode to screen. Okay, now if I zoom out, you'll see something about this group here, which is that it's very big. And what I need for the refraction to work is I need it to be the actual size of my final image. And there's a very simple way of doing that, and that's to come over to Group and just to click on Fixed Resolution and look at the bounding box here and see what happens when I hit that switch. And you'll see that that's now tidily set to the bounds of the project there. Just going to select that Gaussian blur there and hit crop, and you'll see that that's just taken care of that top edge there. You can see there's probably a little line there. If we hit crop, that tidies that up, and again that just makes sure that bounding box fits the screen. Okay, that's great. We've now got our refraction source, and we can set to work on the actual fun part, which is making the drops. So I'm going to select my background group. Again, just for safety, I'm going to set that to fixed resolution. So click on that fixed resolution checkbox there. Just need to set that height to 858. And again, because we've got that blur in there, which is not cropped, the bounding box is not the right size. So let's just hit that crop on the Gaussian blur. So there we go, we've got everything tidied away. We've got our refraction source and our background image, and they are both nicely set to our project size. So then I'm going to select my background, and I'm going to right click, and I'm going to make clone layer. First of all, I want to key these drops over the top. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add an image mask to this enclosing group here. And again, I'm going to keep everything fixed resolution. So switch on that box there, right click, add image mask, and I'm going to take that refraction source, I'm going to add it to the mask source, and I'm going to set the source channel to luminance, because obviously we've got a black and white image there. And obviously we can't see anything at the moment because we're monitoring that over the top of our background. But there you go, there's our drips separate from our background. And then what we can do is select the clone layer, and the secret to this whole look is very, very simple really. It's to come to filters, come to distortion, and obviously we'd want to use something called glass distortion. I've actually tried it with refraction, and that gives a slightly different look, which works pretty well, but the glass distortion gives, I think, the better look in this case. So let's select that. And then what we want to do is we want to grab our refraction source group and add it to the source well here for the glass distortion, like so. And now I just want to point out something very important, which is that the center needs to be down here on the bottom left-hand corner. And that's why this whole business of setting groups to fixed resolution is so important, because this can get completely out of kilter if it's not. you'll notice that where that center is minus 960, and obviously that's half of 1920, and it's minus 429 on Y, and that's half of our project height, which is 858. I'm just labouring that point because it's really important to know how that works, and if you don't do that you can get into all sorts of trouble. Okay, let's just set up our glass distortion filter, and I want to crank the amount all the way up to 500 and just have a little bit of softness. Let's go for 5. And already you can see that it's not looking too bad. We've got our drips and our drops. I'm just scrubbing through here so you can see, and that's really fairly effective as it is. There's one thing I want to do with the refraction source, and that is as the drips hit the drops, I want the drops to be affected by the drips, as it would happen in real life. So let's open up this refraction source group. Let's come to the drops group here. Again, we want to make sure that that's set to fixed resolution by clicking on the fixed resolution switch there. I'm going to come to filters, distortion, bump map, and I'm going to use the drips group, which again I'm going to make sure to set to fixed resolution, as the source for that bump map. So clicking back on the bump map, select the drips group and drag it into the bump map there. So the direction I'm going to set to 5, and the amount I'm going to set all the way up to 1. And you probably won't be able to see this, I don't know if I can show you it, but this really does create a really nice interactive effect where the drops actually get, I don't know if you can see that one there. If I zoom right into that, you might be able to see it. So watch this drop here, and as the drip hits it, there's kind of an interactive effect there going on. And although that's quite subtle, it actually does add quite a lot to the realism of it. So to get this rain really popping, I'm going to come down to this group here. Let's call this rain. And what I'm going to do is come over to filters, and I'm going to come down to sharpen and add the unsharp mask. I'm going to set the radius to 32 and the amount to 2. I'm just going to increase the threshold to 0.05. And if I turn that on and off, I think you can see that that's really kicking through the whites and giving it a much more exciting look. I think I haven't probably got enough. I think I've probably got enough drips. I don't think I've got quite enough drops. So we can always just come back into the drops static, for example, and all we need to do really is increase the initial number. So let's go for 450. And let's just maybe increase the scale. So I'm going to increase that scale up to 75, just giving us some nice fatter drops there. I might also just do the same with the moving drops. Let's increase that scale to 75 too. There, just exaggerating it really so you can get a feel for how this is looking. So that's pretty nice, and I think we're done with our drips and drops. We just need to look at how we're going to do this rack focus. Okay, so you'll remember that we were using this Gaussian blur just to speed things up because it's a lot faster than the blur that we are going to be using. So I'm going to just turn that off, making sure I've got my background group selected. I'm going to come to filters, blur, and I'm going to select defocus. And the first thing I want to do is to turn on the crop switch. This is really important. You can see the extraordinary difference that makes. And again, if I zoom out and we turn on the overlays and I turn off the crop switch, you can see that without the crop, our image is not the right size. And so this is really messing everything up. So whenever you're using a blur within this context, you need to make sure you're using the crop, just as also we need to make sure that our groups are all fixed resolution. So just a really important thing to keep at the forefront of your mind. So let's just come over to this defocus filter. And what I want to do is I want to turn the amount up to 75. And I just want to turn the gain down to 1.5. And you can see what a really nice effect that is. If you want to, you can change the shape. So we could select polygon. Again, look how slow this is, very slow. No, nobody wants a 3-sided polygon, but maybe you want a 5-sided one. And you get this slightly more interesting bokeh, but I think for this one we're going to stick with circle. So first of all, what I want to do is I want to animate the gain. So I'm going to come to 5 seconds on the timeline. I'm going to hit the gain keyframe button and set that value to 1.5. I'm going to come to the first frame and set that value to 0.5. And I think you can see it's darkened everything down, and so we're getting this nice sort of fade up effect, which I think just helps for that rain to read a little bit better. What I also want to do though is obviously animate the defocus. So I'm going to come to 6 seconds on the timeline. So set the defocus amount to 75 and keyframe that. I'm going to come to 7 seconds and set that value down to 0. So that's keyframing it from 75 at 6 seconds down to 0 at 7 seconds. And now the background is cleared and we can see our text much more clearly. What we also need to do, obviously, is we need to add a defocus to our rain layer going in the opposite direction. So let me just select that rain group. Again, everything's got to be fixed resolution. Come over to Filters, Blur, Defocus. Again, step 1 is to turn on the crop. And we're just going to do it in the opposite direction. So don't want quite as much defocus in this instance of the foreground. So I'm going to, we're at 7 seconds, I'm going to hit the keyframe button. I'm going to set the amount to 15. Let's come back to 6 seconds, and obviously we want to set that to 0. So if we scrub through there, you'll see we're racking focus to the background and our foreground drips go out of focus. Just a couple of things I want to do here to the overall scheme of things. I'm going to make a new group above rain here and call it all, and close up rain, close up background, and drag those two into that all group. Select the group, come to filters, color correction, levels, and let's just give it a little bit more drama just by increasing the blacks there, possibly also just punching through the whites. It's really all about getting those drops to really sing out, something like that. What I might also do is come back to this background group here, filters, color correction, colorize, and let's just do a sort of blockbuster look on this. So let's move this over, the blacks over to here somewhere, and the whites, let's click on the whites, move them over towards yellow. Don't want this to be too strong, so what we're going to do is just reduce the intensity down to 0.5, but that gives it a kind of slightly sexier look. And there's one more thing I'd like to do here, just to give it a little bit more production value, and that's to add a glass texture. So what I'm going to do is come to Import, Dirty Glass. I'm going to put a link to this in the comments so you can use this same texture. So import that. So I've mistakenly imported it into my background group. I want to add it to my rain group. But in actual fact, what I want to do is come to that rain group, Object, New Group, and I'm going to call this group Glass. I'm going to bring the rain group into the glass group, and then I'm going to drag my dirty glass into the glass group. So you see we've got glass on top of rain there. And then I'm just going to come over to the properties for the glass, set the scale to 100% so it fills the screen, and let's just reduce the opacity down to about 6, something like that. And you'll see that that just gives just a sense that we're actually looking through a real pane of glass, just that extra little bit of dirt, you know, so you can just obviously adjust that opacity to taste. And because we also want that glass to defocus, we'll need to grab the defocus and drag it out to the top glass group there. Again, remembering to come to the glass group and set it to fixed resolution just to keep everything super tidy. So I hope that's been interesting. Thanks very much indeed for watching, and I hope to see you again on the next one.